Welcome to another episode of the Mixed Signals podcast from Semaphore, where we are talking to the most interesting and important people shaping our new media age. I'm Max Tawney. I'm the media editor of Semaphore. I'm the co-host of the show. And with me, of course, as always, is Semaphore's editor-in-chief, Ben Smith. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here, Max.
This week, we are sitting down with author, journalist, and podcaster Malcolm Gladwell. We'll ask him about why he still believes in narrative podcasting in a chat show world, his surprising optimism about the state of American politics, his weird obsession with melancholy music, and why he probably isn't getting invited back on Joe Rogan anytime soon.
Yeah, Malcolm is something like the opposite of Joe Rogan, I would say.
Are you sure? They both create a lot of hours of podcasting, like pretty regularly.
But only one is like obsessed with editing it.
That's true. Well, we'll ask him about all of that and a lot more right after the break. So Ben, besides journalism, what would you say you've done 10,000 hours of in your life?
I'm getting there on tennis, I think. That's probably about it.
How close, so how close would you say? Are you like 6,000 hours, 7,000 hours?
Oh gosh, now that I think of it, I'm probably like 3,000 hours.
That's still pretty good though. That is a lot of time. People still don't understand that 3,000 hours is a lot of time.
As you say it, I'm revising downward.
Yeah. I mean, even 1,000 hours is like a long time to have done something. Obviously, the reason I ask is because we're having the person who invented the 10,000 hour rule, and that's Malcolm Gladwell. Ben, you know Malcolm Gladwell personally. He's a neighbor of yours, I understand. What's your relationship like with Malcolm? Are you knocking on his door to borrow some sugar?
I'm mostly just a reader, and of long standing. But during the pandemic, he had us over to his place in the Hudson Valley, where the second tier media elites hang out. Who can't hack it in the Hamptons, where I got his sort of, over dinner, some of his theories on things. He has many theories, like college. That's one of my favorites. Apparently, University of Toronto, best college. But he is really, I think, sort of a unique figure in media. He's one of these tiny number of journalists who are super famous and no doubt can, charge companies infinite amounts to go speak to them about how the world works, but has really made this career, which blew up in 2000 with a book called The Tipping Point, of seeding big ideas that really took off and in some ways sort of nailing viral ideas. I think he's sort of controversial. There's this school of thought that he's kind of popularizing and repackaging banalities, but honestly, from my perspective as a reader, he's fun to read. He's fun to talk to you. He thinks about the world in a kind of abstract, horizontal way that I always find fascinating, and it has had an amazing run. Interestingly, his late career, which was much at the New Yorker and in writing books, has been about audio though, and about a company he co-founded with Jacob Weisberg called Pushkin that produces these very bespoke podcasts.
Yeah, and one of the things that surprised me in preparation for this interview is, just to kind of bring audiences behind the scenes. We obviously do a little bit of prep. We like to talk to our guests a little bit beforehand about, what they're interested in, what they're thinking of. I assumed that he wanted to come on the show and, promote his latest projects, maybe share some weird theories, such as apparently the University of Toronto being amazing. I didn't realize it was such a good school. I love Toronto. Maybe I should have gone there. But instead,
the theory is that it's because it has 60,000 students, it's not elitist like the American universities, and that is why Canada is better. Just FYI. Also, he went to the University of Toronto.
The best school in the world is the school that he happened to go to. I love that. That's really great. But of course, the thing that surprised me most is that he doesn't want to talk about, his amazing alma mater and his theories behind why it's so great, but he really wants to talk about podcasting and what makes a podcast successful in the state of audio and podcast journalism right now. I think that is surprising to me.
Interestingly, the thing that makes them great are doing podcasts exactly the way he does them and not the way anybody else does them.
Right. Does that include us?
We're on the wrong side of this one.
Really? Okay. Well, we'll have to confront him about that then when when he joins us. But you know what? Enough from us. Why don't we bring Malcolm on so we can fight him about how terrible our show is?
Let's do it. Thanks so much for joining us, Malcolm.
Not at all. My pleasure.
And I was just rereading your most recent book, The Revenge of the Tipping Point. And in the introduction, You talk about how you were living in a small Chelsea apartment 20 years earlier, and sort of it's the book kind of tipped your life and changed your life. It looks like I can't tell where you are right now, but it does not look like a small Chelsea apartment.
I'm in Hudson, New York.
Well, it's the Chelsea actually of the Hudson Valley. You're now doing audio. You're writing books. You're working for you're still writing a bit for the New Yorker. You have what I imagine to be an unbelievably lucrative speaking career on the side. And I guess I just wondered if you could talk us through what the life and work of what the constellation of Malcolm Gladwell Industries is at the moment. What do you do?
Well, I probably spend my most time on my podcast. We just finished a big 7-part series, which I've been working on since the spring. And then before the spring, I was doing some standalone episodes of Revisionist History. So that's really the bulk of my time. And then I on the side I'm always working on something else simultaneously.
So this is this being a media show, we're always interested in kind of not only the interesting paths that people are taking now, but also the economics of how successful people in media make it work. What are the economics of the Malcolm Gladwell business? Where do you make the majority of your money? Is it from the podcast? Is it from the sporadic paid speaking? Is it other books? What does the pie chart look like?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could answer that question, but I'm not very good at that. I mean, I suppose technically good at financial things, but I'm not interested. I think it's probably, it depends whether you have a book that just came out. So then the book is the biggest thing, and then the book dies down and the book's not so big anymore. The podcast is pretty steady, probably a third to half of my income. Stuff. I don't know. I could be wrong by as much as 30%.
We're going to have your accountant on the next episode to work this out.
And also because, if you want to think about it from an economic perspective, even if the podcast made zero money, or even cost me money, you could make an economic case for it. That's why I don't spend too much time obsessing about what it makes, because I feel like it's the engine of everything. It generates ideas, it keeps me fresh, it keeps my audience engaged, so it has all these other functions. So I'm really indifferent at the end of the day to its immediate financial impact, because I'm so convinced. I had this whole obsession with the fact that journalism has become a profession of the young. People vanish in the 50s and 60s in a way that wasn't true when I was first coming up, but I very early on I became very, very focused on, I did not want to vanish in my 50s. And I think the reason I didn't vanish in my 50s is the podcast. I was able to kind of reinvent myself with the podcast. My point is the podcast pays for itself, even if it doesn't pay for itself.
Why do you think people start vanishing in their 50s and 60s?
I mean, that's probably 100 reasons, but I think that the classic job you had if you were a journalist in your 50s and 60s is you were working at a metropolitan newspaper and you had risen to the point where you could be a correspondent somewhere. That job really doesn't exist anymore. So, and there were a lot of, I worked at the Washington Post in the 80s. There were probably 30 positions, if not more, probably 50 positions for men and women in their 50s and 60s. Legitimate, high profile, high prestige positions. So that's just one newspaper. And I think it's probably a small fraction of that today. But there are other reasons as well. I think as well, the marketplace has become very unforgiving. The journalism marketplace has become very unforgiving. And it's just hard for somebody who has other obligations, or maybe not the energy level they used to have, or isn't as flexible as they used to have, to stay relevant.
You're one of the great theorists of our moment, and have been for a long time. I'm going to pocket your theory about podcasts as a life extension technology. But thinking about just, your famous book, The Tipping Point, which was in part about how small changes, I think the one that always stuck in my head was removing graffiti from the subways can produce positive results, safer subways in that case. And Revenge of the Tipping Point, as the title suggests, It's not entirely negative, but it is a darker book, and it's about, how things like suicide can be socially contagious. And I kind of wanted to ask you whether that just reflects a darker view of the world, since you were in that kind of Chelsea apartment 20 years ago, and has your sort of overall worldview darkened?
I think what's weird is my overall worldview is probably brightened. So but I really liked, when I was young and I was really into music, I would make mixtapes, and I would give my mixtapes to people, and they would always remark that the music was unrelentingly melancholy. I really only like downer music, even though I am not a melancholy person in the slightest. So there is this sort of thing where I'm actually very happy and stable and positive in my outlook and relentlessly optimistic. But my tastes run to the dark side, my kind of cultural tastes. I like slow, sad songs. And I've noticed with my podcast recently that I'm just doing one incredibly emotional and heavy story after another. But it's not a reflection of me. I don't know why there is this divide. It's just like, I really like, I feel like if you're a storyteller, you have to make a decision pretty early on whether you're more interested in making people laugh or cry. And for me, it's dead easy. It's cry. I'll go with cry 100 times over laugh.
All right, we'll see if we can get there today.
What was going on the mixtapes? What were the melancholy kind of tracks that we were putting on these?
This is like kind of, late 80s new wave, a lot of kind of dreary, moany, British, troubled British youth from Manchester kind of complaining about their life. The Smiths, that kind of thing. But also, like, I would find an artist and only play their one really, really, really sad song. That kind of thing. I would locate the I did a podcast episode on the saddest song in the world. George Jones is He Stopped Loving Her Today. And that was really, if you had to look at the 100 podcast episodes that I've done, that was the one that was the purest expression of my intellectual interests.
I share that a little bit in the sense that I'm not really a melancholy person, but I do get a sort of satisfaction out of like kind of experiencing that with through music as well. I've also been drawn to melancholy music kind of throughout my life. I'm curious though to kind of backtrack to the more surprising point, which is that your outlook has brightened. Why would you say that is?
Well, I'm happier than I was in my 30s. Settled. I have kids and a wife and a nice house, and I don't know, just like I wasn't depressed in my 30s, but I'm clearly happier now. I mean, I didn't really, I think that's probably true of a lot of people. I don't think your late 20s and early 30s are necessarily you're restless and you're trying to figure out what to do, and you probably, go out too much and sleep in too much and don't exercise enough.
Very interesting theory.
Max, you're in that. How old are you? Come on, tell me.
I'm 33, so
yeah.
I think I'm starting to pass out of that zone. No, I actually feel like I maybe I experienced that a little bit earlier. I'm having too much fun. I mean, we're getting to do this kind of thing. We talk to people, the most interesting and fun people in media all the time. So I'm having a little bit of fun. But I do think I sleep a little bit too late, and I probably do go out too much. But it's mostly for work, It's mostly for interacting with other media people. That's my excuse. But I guess to get at what I was trying to kind of allude to is, you write in your book about the power of big cultural narratives. You call this the kind of overstory that shapes actions. And, the U.S. cultural narrative right now is basically like borderline civil war strife between two competing ideologies. How worried does that make you that that's the overstory? And do you think that is kind of what our cultural overstory is at the moment?
Yeah. Am I long-term worried? Probably not long-term worried. I'd say I'm short-term worried. But I think that if you know even a little about American history, we've been through some pretty dark periods. that are probably darker than now, and we came out okay. So I'm not that. And I generally think that we overestimate the extent to which there is malevolence on either side of the political equation. I think most people, the middle is larger than it appears to us. And it's only a matter of time before politicians rediscover the middle. And I think there is a kind of gravitational pull ultimately towards the middle that I think will overwhelm these this particular divisive moment that we're in.
You write a lot about place in your new book, and you're thinking a lot about how place shapes people's views. I'm kind of curious how you feel like place has shaped our current political discourse. Why do you think that the middle has been kind of lost or taken a back seat?
Well, fundamentally, America's too big. And so it was always going to be tough sledding. And you have to kind of work with the fact that the place is massive. There are some natural divisions among people and regions that are always going to be hard to bridge. And I think the cost of that, the upside of that is an incredible amount of diversity and dynamism. The downside is every now and again, you're going to have difficulty managing just how kind of vast, culturally and economically and geographically vast like all the time. There was something I remember, we were doing this crime thing, the podcast about a year ago maybe, and there was some tweet by J.D. Vance saying, I'm about to go to New York. I'm basically saying he was terrified about going to New York because it was so unsafe. Meanwhile, like Cincinnati, which is the big city nearest to where he grew up, is like so much more dangerous than New York. It's not even close. I mean, it's like, we're talking about like 2x difference, or I'm mildly exaggerating. But the idea that an intelligent, thoughtful person could be so fundamentally misinformed about the most important city in the United States, to the point where he wildly exaggerates how safe it is and wildly underestimates how safe his own corner of the universe is. That seems to be very American. I don't feel like Berliners have difficulty grasping just how safe Munich is, right? Or people in Frankfurt aren't wrestling with, the reality of life in Cologne. But I feel like you can live in Cincinnati and be be a very thoughtful, intelligent person, live outside of Cincinnati and be genuinely puzzled by what New York City is like, right? That seems to be very American.
But you have a lot of empathy for J.D. Vance in that situation. In general, I think you mostly do try to speak to that middle and stay out of the most insane and toxic culture wars. And you did get swept into one a few weeks ago where you said that you sort of confessed that you had felt cowed into being more supportive of trans people in sports than you really were, which in your admission, which I think is pretty unusual, honestly, for people to, I don't know, for public intellectuals to talk like that, to admit that they were wrong for any reason at all. And it was greeted, of course, by like 15 columns from people refusing to accept your apology, basically.
Well, it wasn't, I will say, as a mild corrective, I was struck, as is always the case in these internet brush fires, by how few people actually listened to the thing that I said. I was the moderator of a panel. That's the key fact that everyone, and as the moderator, could not speak my mind. Moderators are not supposed to. I was under strict instructions to moderate, and I accepted the role of moderator because I wanted to moderate. And I looked back with the benefit of 4 years and said, you know what? There was a specific moment in the debate where I didn't do a good job of moderating. That was all it is. That's all it was. But I swear, nobody bothered to actually listen to the, and it's like, it's 1.5 minutes of a 2-hour conversation for a relatively obscure but very good South African track and field podcast. The whole thing was like so hilarious, and like it was just a sign of part of my problem is that I did a debate a couple of years back with Matt Tiabi and Douglas Murray who I will
That
say
guy really doesn't like you. Wow.
he doesn't like me. They were so, their feathers were so ruffled by this encounter that they continue to carry. I don't want to call it. I don't know. Who knows what it is? I think they have a picture of me on their bulletin board with all kinds of sharp objects in it.
Oh, so you don't actually, I wasn't really aiming to kind of dive into and correct an internet controversy, but just to put a point on it, you actually don't feel that you ever didn't speak your mind or felt cowed and did not speak your mind.
Well, I don't know. There was this moment,
particularly on this question about sports. You're an athlete.
I didn't ever change my mind. I mean, I was writing about this issue 10 years ago, and it's a matter of public record the way I feel about this issue. I was a moderator, and being a moderator of a panel on trans participation in sports is really hard, as I discovered. So I was just like I was like, man, and I have a kind of propensity for self-reflection, often public self-reflection. I think it's useful. I think it makes you a better thinker.
How do you think, because you mentioned the internet and the way that it's kind of people interact with it and it warps people's views, and, how people get a very narrow view and oftentimes a wrong view of something that you feel. How do you feel like the internet changed the way that places have, shaped our thinking?
I think at the end of the day, we will look back on the first 20 years of the internet and realize that we, in some senses, overestimated the way it changed the way it changed people thought and behaved. I think that there's a kind of thing that happens in the beginning when everyone, when I give my kids a new toy, they go nuts with the new toy, and you'd think there was no other toy in the world. And then like a week later, you can't, I mean, it's discarded and forgotten. And unless it's like, magna tiles or something like that's kind of foundational. Anything, so I think we were in a new toy phase. And I once read this data on what does it mean when something goes viral online? And the answer is the number of people it reaches is like so insanely small. It's like, if you grew up in the 80s and the New York Times reviewed your book and it didn't like your book, everyone read the bad review. It was like soul destroying. Now, if someone online doesn't like your book, who cares? Like, it's just gone the next day. Like, it's like, it's just, I'm a little bit baffled by a lot of this kind of the internet changes everything talk, because I kind of think that it's so ephemeral, so much of what it does. And we so exaggerate, the impact of these kind of viral moments. I did a piece for the New Yorker during Arab Spring. There was all this claim that Twitter was going to create democracy around the world. And I was like, no, I got so much heat for that position. And I was 100% correct. Twitter did not free the Arab world. It was never going to free the Arab world. It was the whole thing. Facebook is not an agent to throw off the shackles of political expression. This is a total nonsense cooked up by like 6 people living in the valley. Like,
I mean, Truth Social has freed the United States.
Exactly.
You said something earlier that I thought was interesting. Like, it used to be that, if the New York Times gave you a negative review of your book, everybody would read that negative review and presumably nobody would read the book. And now that doesn't happen so much, and it just kind of passes. It's just another piece of information that just kind of, passes through, the news cycle. I'm curious, have you noticed that with your own books? Does it pan in the New York Times, just not affect sales the way that it used to?
Well, pretty much all my books have been panned in the New York Times. So I don't know, like, I have a pretty unbroken string of like negative reviews. So I stopped taking it, wasn't that I don't take it seriously, it's that I stopped thinking that there were consequences.
Wait, that's really interesting. So not a single one of your books has gotten a positive review in the Times?
The only book that got a positive review was The Bomber Mafia, which sold fewer copies than any other book I've ever sold. So I now take it as I'm much more concerned if I get a rave than I am, because I feel like the empirical evidence suggests that the A New York Times review is negatively correlated with sales.
Amazing.
Well, we have to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more from Malcolm Gladwell right after this.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about one of the biggest blind spots in marketing today. Another listener question for you, Josh. If you had to point to one thing that marketers are missing, something they're not thinking hard about right now, what's, I guess, the biggest blind spot in the marketing industry?
One of the biggest, I think, is as marketers, we tend to be all about ourselves. It's me, the marketer. And actually, it needs to be much more you, the person out in the real world who we're trying to engage and connect with. That's the challenge, the blind spot I definitely think the industry has.
What do you mean by that?
So as marketers, we tend to really care about what we're doing. We care about our new piece of creative. We care about our Super Bowl ad. We care about our campaign. We like broadcasting us to the world, our products to the world. And no one actually lives their life like that. And when we think that people care about what we're doing, we get misguided and sidetracked by what we're saying. We actually need to create relevancy. We actually need to create engagement. We need to think about customer relationship management. It's much easier as a marketer to get someone to buy your product for the second time than it is to constantly try and find that first purchase again and again and again, unending. So one of the blind spots is not focusing on CRM, customer relationship management, enough.
So where can people go for a second time to find out more about this and other marketing topics, since you've already, no doubt, reached them for the first time?
Head on over to thinkwithgoogle.com. We just published a new guide for CMOs and prospective CMOs. It's called Back to Business. It's really, really great on a lot of the insights that we're talking about, some of the blind spots that exist in marketing, and how you can unsee those blind spots.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.
Let's move on to the company that you co-founded, Pushkin, which is you're the voice of it. Revisionist History is one of the shows, and you guys are really zigging where everybody else is zagging, because we are in a universe of chat shows like this, of basically inexpensively produced conversations, long form, lightly edited. And you are very intensely focused on scripted narrative audio shows like Revisionist History, like Deep Cover, like Jill Lepore's very kind of like elaborate historical conversations. What are you seeing that other people don't in this space that we're in right now in podcasting?
Well, what we do, I would argue, is more fun, more intellectually demanding, engaging, allows us to get deeper, allows us to be more thoughtful. The shelf life of what we do is much, much longer. Chat shows measure their half-life in hours. We measure the half-life of our work in years. I did an audiobook with Paul Simon 3 years ago now. It will be as relevant 10 years from now as it was when it came out. I'm much more interested in that. I was sitting having lunch on the street in Hudson today, and someone came up to me and was talking to me about my book, Blink, which I wrote 21 years ago. And they were talking about it as if I'd written it yesterday. That's what I'm interested in. We also think that people have turned away from narrative under the false belief that it does not offer a real economic model for podcasting. And I think that's wrong. I think it's because, we have this, what we call the Zelig strategy, which is that if you think of a narrative podcast as simply the first in a series of stages, of narrative stages, then it makes perfect economic sense. You test an idea in a 6-part podcast. You then take the same augmented reporting and you create an audio book, which might be 30% longer and have some new twists and turns, and which opens up the same material to a very different audience. Remember, a very, very, very successful narrative podcast might have 1 million downloads an episode. Potential audience for that is in the hundreds of millions. The idea that you've exhausted your audience with a podcast is absurd. So there's a whole different group of people who want to consume audiobooks. They want to consume, so you do a version for them. And then you take the audiobook and you say, is there a print book in this? Which there usually is. And then you do a print book. And you've done 3 bites of the apple. And the marginal cost of the second and third bite is quite small. and the marginal value of the second and third bite is quite large. So thought of that way, this is a business model that I think makes a huge amount of sense. And you're not stuck doing 200 shows a year, right?
One of those stages that you didn't mention, but I think is part of it, is licensing these stories or giving them to a big streamer or a Hollywood studio.
Yeah.
You're betting on these licensing deals with the streaming platforms and the studios at a moment when a lot of them have contracted, right? Peak streaming bubble ended in 2022, 2023. Now it's a much smaller business. Why do you think that can still work?
Well, there's a reason I omitted the fourth stage. We don't need it. It's just gravy. I mean, we actually get a lot of interest and have had ongoing interest from Hollywood for a number of our projects. But to me, that's icing on the cake. It's like, for our model to work, that is the most variable portion of the kind of content cascade. And I don't even expect it. It's just, if it comes along, fine. And by the way, if you look at the economics, those Hollywood deals are, when you actually look at, I've done many of them in the course of my career. They make you absolutely nothing, even when they are quote unquote successful, compared to what you make in the other stages. So it's like, it can go away, it can come back even stronger. It doesn't change. The real story is inside the podcast, audiobook, print book sequence.
It's so interesting to hear, because I mean, I always find, like, whenever you have like a media company, and Condé Nast among others, when they start telling investors that, well, like, a core of our strategy is the studio business, it's just like the reddest of red flags, because as you say, it's very unpredictable and the actual revenue never quite matches the headline, and it's in 15 years maybe.
Yeah. A really interesting case study, and I've never asked him this, is have Michael Lewis on the show. And Michael Lewis has sold more to Hollywood than maybe any other nonfiction writer of his generation, right? Ask him what percentage of his net worth comes from his Hollywood sales. I'm going to guess it's 5 to 10%, if that. I just don't think it's material.
All right, we're going to send this to him, and you can help him get us on here. Speaking of really dark things that I don't know if they're really going to be adapted by Hollywood, can you tell us a little about your next project, which is essentially a murder mystery? It's called Alabama Murders.
I wanted to do true crime, but I wanted to do true crime our way. So we wanted to do a kind of inverted true crime, not inverted, but so it's a story about a murder that takes place in the Shoals, northwestern Alabama, involving a preacher's wife. It begins very conventionally with this kind of gothic Southern crime. And then the story, over the course of 7 episodes, the story grows and grows and grows. The crime takes place in 1988. The story doesn't really end until last year. So we end up with almost 35 years and we go in a million directions. And it is, I think it's one of the best things we've ever done at Revisionist History. It is so, in a way that I didn't anticipate, so incredibly emotional and moving that when we were doing the table reads, on 2 or 3 occasions, the whole room was crying by the time we were. I mean, like, it is son of a bananas. I really, 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 really can't wait for the world to hear it. It was just, but it's to my point. It's like, if we were to go the route that everyone else route, and I could do an always on show, but I wouldn't be able to do stuff like that, which for me personally, is so much more meaningful. And, wrestling with telling a complicated story over an extended period, it's just a challenge, a kind of intellectual challenge that I need to feel fulfilled. That's different from just talking to people.
And how do you think about building a business around that kind of work? Because Pushkin has made a lot of stuff that I listen to and love. But also, I think, in 2023, you guys laid off a third of your staff, and one of your colleagues, Mia Lobel, wrote a piece basically saying that in her view, you'd gotten obsessed with growth. You tried to grow too fast. You tried to scale something that kind of fundamentally couldn't scale. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what you learned from that, what you'd make of that.
I think Mia was right. Absolutely right. I don't think what we do is scalable. I don't think we want it. I think the mistake we made is that not only did we think it was possible, but we thought that's what we wanted. We thought that would be more fun and interesting. And it wasn't more fun and interesting. I think so. I think, she's 100% right. I think we're happier now. I think there's now a match between our organizational form and the task we're trying to tackle. We're never going to be call your daddy, right? It's not happening. I'm not even sure call your daddy is call your daddy at this point. I don't know. But like, that's fine. Like, we forget there's a thing. There are lots and lots and lots of businesses that exist because the people involved in those businesses want to do cool things and want to have their mind engaged. My father was an academic who I'm guessing could have made several times more money in the private sector. He's a very, 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 very smart man. Didn't want that. He wanted to sit and think big thoughts. And that made him insanely happy. That's the world I grew up in. I didn't grow up in a world that said that the marker of success in the world is how much money you make. The sacrifice, my father made those kinds of sacrifices willingly because he had the enormous pleasure of looking forward to sitting down and working every day. I don't think he ever didn't enjoy what he did. And that was my model. And that's what we're doing.
So then have you been discouraged by, I guess, this conventional wisdom that's emerged in podcasting since, I guess, Gimlet shuttered, that, it's like, oh, these podcasts, we spent way too much money on them and we paid everybody who worked at them way too much. And we just got to really lean into just the chat show format. And that's what it's going to be. Have you been discouraged that the podcasting business has really moved in that direction?
Nope, massively encouraged. The more people go in that direction, the more special we are. No, I don't want the world to do what we're doing. I want the world to go off and do one more chat show that, no, we want to be different, right? This is probably another separate thing that I do not understand, and maybe this is an incredibly naive point, but I never understood the very human disinclination to differentiate. So I remember when I first came to the United States, and I would go and visit college campuses. And I was like, why do they all look the same? It didn't make any sense to me. Like, you would have thought that in a country this big, with thousands of colleges, what they would really try to do is to be as different as possible from everybody else, right? But instead, there's St. John's decides to do the great books. One tiny-ass place in Annapolis decides to differentiate. And everyone else is trying to be Yale on a budget. Why? And it baffles me. No, be different. Why don't I was chatting with this, I did a couple of shows on the Jesuits a couple years ago. I love the Jesuits. And I ran into the guy who's the headmaster, or whatever they call him, of the big Jesuit school in Manhattan. We were chatting about Georgetown and all. And it was they kind of get it. There is something fundamentally different about Georgetown and Boston College. The difference between Boston College and Boston University is actually measurable and appreciable, right? There's something in the ether that's different. And it's because the Jesuits are not trying to replicate some Calvinist, Quaker, whatever, Protestant model from the 18th century. They're doing their own 17th, 16th century thing, right? So, and I love that, but I don't understand why there's not more of that. Anyway, I'm much more interested in being a Jesuit in a sea of atheists than I am joining the crowd.
The equivalent, I suppose, of Yale on a budget in the podcast space is Joe Rogan on a budget.
Oh my God.
And there's a sort of race there's a lot of that kind of super long form, very shaggy manosphere show. You have a very funny episode about Joe Rogan, which you describe him as a giant, tattooed, tightly muscled possum. And the opossum thing is because, in your view, he kind of rolls over
during
his interviews. This is one in which he let RFK Jr. in particular just sort of claim that the Spanish flu was not actually a virus because a chiropractor in Florida had written an article saying that. I think we probably don't need to go too deep on the specifics. But, people really like that. People love that show. It's way more popular than your show. What is that? What does that tell you?
Does it bother? I mean, there's no universe in which Revisionist History is going to have more listeners than Joe Rogan, right? So, that's not the game we're playing. And he's a charming man. You can get exposure to a corner of, not more than a corner of the world, by listening to his show that you wouldn't. I listen to his show, not every episode. I wouldn't be able to have a full-time job. I think the only people who could listen to his show are in its entirety are people who are incarcerated.
A lot of people drive for work.
Yeah, but the 2 hours. Who drives 2 hours?
No, I mean like truck drivers, Uber drivers.
I see. Know. Yes, those people. But no, I've had more fun listening to some of his episodes. I mean, he kind of gets some characters. So it's like you're present at a dinner party with some fascinating guests. I totally get that. I just wish he was better at his job. I wish he just wasn't so passive and so kind of so easily influenced by the arcane enthusiasms of his guests. I mean, I just feel like I would love to do a natural experiment where you pretended to be someone with wacky views, you got on Joe Rogan, and you just saw how far you could go saying ludicrous things before he actually woke up from his stupor and challenged you on it, right? There's a guy, Eric Weinstein. I was listening to an Eric Weinstein. Is it Eric Weinstein on?
That's the guy.
I get his name on Rogan once. And he started saying progressively more insane things. I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting for Rogan. Same thing with you. That's why I did the RFK show. It's like RFK gets nuttier and nuttier and nuttier, and you're just waiting for Joe to wake up, and Joe can't wake up. It's like that's the problem. But he is entertaining in the main. Yeah.
Has he ever asked you to go on the show? I feel like
I was on the show.
You were on the show. What did you think when he was on? Did he let you just kind of walk all over him? Possum?
We talked a lot about
roll over?
We talked a lot about ultimate fighting. I had a blast. I would go back in an instant if he called me. I'm
not sure he's going to call you.
I know. I think I burned that bridge. It's so sad. I have no issue with it. I'd happily do that. I don't have any. There are some voices. I think that one of the mistakes liberals make when they look at conservative media is they lump them. There's huge differences between Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson. Right? Ben Shapiro is actually, I have an enormous amount of respect for him. I think he's thoughtful. I think he's intelligent. I think he engages with the other side. I don't always agree with him, but I can see the pattern of his thinking. And I think he's smart. Like someone like Tucker, I just think is unhinged, like somehow lost the plot. And Rogan's just lazy. There's a world of difference between those three guys.
Something you find on both Tucker's show, Rogan's show, a lot of social media, the internet right now is, and people call them conspiracy theories, which is sort of, I guess, a shorthand for this, I don't know, beliefs that there are really like unseen forces, whether they are like angels and devils or aliens or Israelis and Jews or whichever, like, would take your pick, but that our universe is shaped by these kind of dark forces that exist just outside of your field of vision, and that this podcaster can bring to light for you. But I'm curious, like, what you make of their prevalence and of whether like the shifts in our culture, and particularly like away from reading and toward talking and listening, are part of that.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It's a very interesting question about when we are making this big shift towards an oral culture as opposed to a written culture. I mean, a lot of this there's a kind of moral hazard associated with the fact that a lot of when conventional systems work too well, people have the luxury to engage in fantasy. So when vaccines have all but wiped out previously deadly infectious diseases, people have the luxury to engage in crackpot notions about infectious diseases and not vaccinate their kids, right? You can do that you can't not vaccinate your kid in, 1965 if you're living in a developing world country. You sort of can today. Why? Because the system has become so. So there's this thing that, like, I sort of feel like that's the flip side to the fact that we've gotten really good at lots of things. And that permits a lot of people to be intellectually lazy in a way that, and to entertain these kinds of absurd theories in a way that people just didn't have the freedom to when there were actual stakes involved.
But just to elaborate on the point you were making about, like you said that you think we're moving toward an oral culture. And obviously a lot of your career, probably to a degree that when you were a young Washington Post reporter, you didn't really imagine, is oral rather than written. Like, what, can you just sort of play that out? I'm totally fascinated by this too. And Joe Wiesenthal turned me on to Walter Ong, and there's a whole like field of research about orality. Like, where are we headed in a post-text world?
Well, I mean, I have not thought deeply about this. I would only say that I am struck by how much more available emotionality is in when people are listening than when they're reading. And how much harder it is to do. Every now and again, when I'm doing my podcast, I try to explain some complicated analytical thing, and you have to take it out. Almost always, you can't do it. Like it's like I can't talk to you about in a compelling way about some complicated feature of tax policy and how the curves work, and it just doesn't work. I got to show you the curve, and I can't show you the curve. But can I talk about someone whose heart was broken by? Yes, I can. I can. So it's like if you're shifting a lot towards emotional narratives as opposed to analytical narratives, that's going to have a consequence for the culture. Not necessarily a bad consequence, by the way, but it will have a consequence. I just know that I can see my own storytelling shift. I tell stories profoundly different ways than I would when I was just writing in print.
Yeah, I suppose Rogan kind of gets that, right? That's probably why he's not getting into analytical arguments. I get the sense that nobody wants from us on this show, like kind of tough accountability interviews where we're screaming at each other. It's just not what it's not what anybody's dialed into this stuff for.
Yeah, they hated it when we had, Vivek on and you've argued with him relentlessly. And I think that the audiences literally hated that.
I liked it.
I know. I also enjoyed it, but I think that it was, but it was true that it was just like we couldn't do the same thing on cable, that they can do on cable news that people, I guess used to like to watch. But I guess, Malcolm, to bring this back to what you said earlier, about being able to turn a podcast into a book, into an audio book, how are the audiences different for each of those mediums? And what have you noticed are the differences between someone who consumes a podcast version of one of your stories versus somebody who consumed the book version of one of those stories versus somebody who consumed the audiobook version of one of those stories, or, the fourth stage, someone who watched the movie?
The mythological movie?
Yes.
I don't know. No idea. I'm not sure it's a difference of character. I think it may be just a difference of habit. I have always been impressed by the fact that you can get a book on the bestseller list of the New York Times by selling whatever it is, 5,000 copies a week, right? In a country of 380 million people. What that tells you is that our definition of success in the book industry is so insanely modest that, like, you could do that material. You could publish a book, it could be a massive bestseller, and you could be safe in the assumption that 99.9% of Americans have never heard of it. So what does that tell you? That tells you you have infinite possibilities with that same material. You can go and, you can go and sell it 17 different ways and you'll be fine. It's like, you're not like, I look at a guy like James Clear, who sold an astonishing number of books and, iterates in this really interesting way. And my hat is off to him. He's absolutely right. Like, you can keep going because there's always more people out there who you're not reaching. And I feel like that too many creators prioritize the creation of new material as a way to further their brand or business, what have you, and to creative enterprise, as opposed to coming up with ways to repurpose their existing material to reach a broader audience as what they already have. And there's a kind of is it not laziness? I don't know what it is.
It's the opposite of laziness, isn't it? It's kind of it's insistence on
Novelty
and doing everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And like weirdly, when I look at the music industry, they have no such compunction. Is that the right use of compunction? Rolling Stones are still playing I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Turns out people are quite happy to listen to that song 100,000 times. Like that should, I don't mean in a disparaging way. That should tell us something, right? That the pleasures from something that is really, really well done are not a one-time only thing. My kids will read the same book over and over again, and they'll get something different out of it each time. So I think that in our strategy, we are taking that lesson to heart and saying, let's just take a really great story and go out of our way to reach as many different kinds of people as possible.
Well, on that note, Malcolm, we're gonna package this up for the newsletter, slice it up for social media, put it on YouTube and audio feeds.
Excellent.
So and thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Good.
The fun thing about Malcolm and about talking to him, he's just got a theory about everything. Like whenever you ask him about anything, it's not like he has an answer. It's like he has a whole theory. He's got a theory about Rogan. And so it is always interesting and fun. And obviously the theories are kind of up for challenge. And I think he kind of may have changed the Rogan theory halfway through. But I do think his theory about media, it's something obviously just keeps coming up on the show, that the people who are doing the best work are kind of obsessed with the work, interested in it, surprisingly, like he's in that category of people, not that interested in the audience, doesn't really know who's reading it where, but fundamentally, like the kind of point of his work is just getting obsessed with something, exploring it, and kind of hooking people onto these somewhat contagious ideas.
See, I thought it was actually the opposite. I thought that he knew his audience so well that he was like, the podcast could make nothing, but it's essentially marketing for all of the other stuff, that does well, whether that's the speaking or the books or the audiobooks or maybe the TV show or movie down the line. It seemed like he knew his audience so well that he could do that.
I did like his theory of podcasts, that like they are the sort of base layer of media and that you should just make them because, and I actually think that to a degree that I'm only starting to realize this is true in the sort of right-wing podcast space, like the podcast is actually where you meet and talk to people. It's like the base layer of your politics and of your relationships. Like I've run into people who say, oh yeah, I talked to so-and-so, I talked to so-and-so. Then you realize, oh, you didn't ever meet them socially. You've only talked to them on camera, but you've done it for 7 hours, so you feel like you're friends. And I think, which is a slightly different space, but I think similarly, there's this idea that right now, at least, and for him, audio is where you explore and play with ideas and you can build it all into something else. Also, apparently, it extends your life.
You're totally right, though, Ben, in the sense that the podcast being the base layer for kind of other stuff. I mean, you obviously see this in politics with, it's the reason why I think so many candidates who want to be president are active podcasters, right? They are using it as a way to work through ideas, as you said, and also kind of introduce themselves, to and connect with their audience and with their listeners. And it is clearly a really powerful medium and tool for achieving your other goals, whether that's, selling a book or becoming elected to something. Clearly the podcast is marketing for a lot of people.
He is also, and maybe I think this may be a reason that his work, which sometimes is hyper relevant, is right now a little kind of niche and quiet, is like, have we talked to anybody who is less worried about America?
To be honest, I thought that was kind of, I thought that seemed to be like a slate pitch, right? Like I thought that was kind of a contrarian take, right? To a certain degree. Like I do think that, like, obviously based on a lot of the things that he's written and the way he talks about Trump and people like Rick Scott, in his new book, he obviously is not a fan of these people. I think it's a little bit of I think it's a provocative stance from someone who obviously has kind of different political views, but also maybe not. He seems to be a guy who wants to chart a different course from everybody else, and that clearly defines his perspectives.
Well, he is Canadian.
Yeah, maybe so. He has the stakes are lower for him. Well, Ben, anyway, thanks for inviting Malcolm on. It was really fun. Although, wait, it was me who invited Malcolm on, actually.
Oh, actually, you're right. Thank you, Max, for inviting Malcolm on. I'm sorry.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry that I screwed up our recording in Cannes through some logistical blunders, but I'm glad we were able to get him back.
That's true. Instead of doing this doing this recording in several rooms in our office, we could have done it over a spritz, glass of wine, and the beaches and breezy Cannes. So maybe we'll have to do it next year.
Some tight-fisted executive refused to authorize the budget. I'm gonna, as soon as I figure out who that person is.
Yes, please get to the bottom of that. But anyway, thanks again, Ben.
Thank you.
Well, that is it for us this week. Thanks so much again for listening to the Mixed Signals podcast, particularly if you got this far. Mixed Signals is produced by Sheena Ozaki, with special thanks to Josh Billinson, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor is David Remnick. David, what did you think about our interview with your correspondent writer, Malcolm Gladwell? Let us know.
Who files at least once every few years.
It's a decent cadence.
Please do subscribe to Mixed Signals wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
And feel free to leave us a 5-star review, but only if it's 5 stars. And if you still want more, you can always sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter out every Sunday night.